Hello, I'm Micah Johnson-Levy. I'm a freshman at Pioneer High School. I first learned about Dustin Lance Black when my parents brought me and my two sisters to see a reading of 8 at the University of Michigan. On stage that night, I watched the story of a trial where 2 mothers with twin sons wanted the right to marry and had the courage to join a lawsuit challenging California's Proposition 8, the voter initiative that made it illegal for 2 people of the same sex to marry in the state of California. You see, I'm a twin and I have 2 moms. That night, while I was in the theater watching the actors and actresses read the script that Mr. Black prepared, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was being represented on stage. My story, my life, for everyone in the theater to see. I saw myself on stage that night, a girl who has so many other things to focus on, like school and basketball, that I sometimes fail to recognize that my parents still aren't allowed to get married. When I see something like this in front of me, it gives me hope. Hope that more things like this will appear and help more people see that my life and my family is normal, and that my existence is not irresponsible or wrong in any way. The fact that someone finally stood up and not only said that, but showed it, has made me so optimistic for the future. So that is when I first heard about Dustin Lance Black, and after that, I wanted to know everything I could about him. Many of you probably know Mr. Black because of his work on the gay romance film, The Journey of Jared Price, or maybe Something Close to Heaven, a short movie he wrote and directed. Or maybe you know that he wrote and directed the award-winning movie Milk, about the life and times and tragic death of Harvey Milk and San Francisco Mayor Moscone. I watched the movie a few weeks ago, and I wanted more than anything to be able to be the kind of activist that Harvey Milk was. To me, the movie was not only a story about the life of Harvey Milk, it was about inspiring people to make a change in their lives and not just wait for it to happen on its own. And of course, Mr. Black also wrote the screenplay for J. Edgar. So all of you here tonight know that Dustin Lance Black is an inspirational filmmaker. What many of you may not know is that Dustin Lance Black is also someone who has given hope to young people, gay and straight alike, who do not know where to turn. The example he has set for others has inspired hundreds and hundreds of young people who only want to live their lives, feel what they want to feel, and love whom their heart tells them to love. I admire Dustin Lance Black, and after you hear him tonight, I think you will too. Please welcome tonight's keynote speaker, Dustin Lance Black.
Wow. Thank you so much, Micah. I sort of had to compose myself. I'm not even kidding for just a second. That was very, very meaningful to me, Micah. Thank you so much. So, first off, thank you for having me back in Michigan. I had the great honor of speaking before some of you, many of you, a couple of years ago. So I'll try to avoid a lot of those stories. But I think I'll start with a bit of a speech that I read last time, just to pick up where we left off. And this is a speech that was given by Mr. Harvey Bernard Milk, and it was given about a week after he was elected to public office in San Francisco. At the time, I was just a young boy. I was living out in San Antonio, Texas, and I was very, very closeted. And he said this: "Somewhere in Des Moines or San Antonio, there is a young gay person who all of a sudden realizes that she or he is gay, knows that if the parent finds out, they'll be tossed out of the house. The classmates will taunt the child, and the Anita Bryants and John Briggs are doing their bit on TV, and that child has several options: staying in the closet or suicide. And then one day, that child might open up the paper, and it says, 'Homosexual elected in San Francisco.' And there are 2 new options. One is to go to California, or stay in San Antonio and fight. Now, shortly after I heard that speech, my family moved to California. And I did learn about San Francisco, and I did learn about Harvey Milk, and it gave me hope, and it gave me resolve, and it gave me the strength to start traveling this country to places like San Antonio, Texas, and Virginia, and right here in Michigan, and to start fighting. And to start fighting in the same way so many of you are now. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing, and I know it is important. But last night I flew in and from New York City, and I hadn't had a shower or warm water or electricity for a few days, and I land in the home of Kyle Evans and Michael, am I going to say your last name wrong, Cicchetti, right? I walk in, and there's a 65 Mustang Shelby in the dining room, right? So I think I'm losing my mind, but I'm definitely in Detroit. And we have this really lovely dinner, like a fantastic dinner, actually. And Michael Stabler, who you all know and who spoke earlier, we got into a little conversation. And he said, in the United States, so often when people meet you, they say, what is it that you do? What do you do? And he said, but you go abroad, and people are interested in what you're interested in. They want to know what you think about. They want to know what drives you. They want to know your why. Why do you do what you do? What makes you tick? So if you give me a few moments, I want to talk a little bit about that tonight. And I want to give you some of my whys, why I do what I do. And for gay and lesbian people, for LGBT people, oftentimes you can look to one story in particular that helps define our whys, and that's the coming out story. Now, gay and lesbian people are having to come out all the time, right? Because we're not always immediately identifiable. After I'm done with this and I have 3 or 4 glasses of wine, I will absolutely be immediately identifiable as a gay man, with any luck. But we have to come out. So if you're coming out all the time, what does it mean, your coming out story? And to me, that means that one where you had the most to lose. And for me, that coming out story, what most defines my why is when I came out to my mom over the Christmas break in 1996, and I had to travel from Los Angeles, where I was in school at UCLA, out to Virginia, where they had all moved to. Now, a little bit about me, for those who missed my last little talk a couple of years back. Just to give you a little bit of background, I grew up in a Mormon home, and a Mormon home way out in San Antonio, Texas, right? So let me give you a little taste of what you learn when you're a little Mormon kid out in San Antonio, Texas on Sundays. On very special Sundays, you go into church, and they got the satellites out in the parking lot, and they aim it up at the sky, and they beam in the president of the Mormon church. And at the time, it was Spencer W. Kimball, and I see that big screen come down. I'm 6 years old, so this is like Star Trek. This is amazing new technology. And I look up at this big white-haired man, and he says these words. He says, homosexuality is sin. Next to the crime of murder comes the sin of sexual impurity. And I was terrified, even at 6 years old, because I was into much older men, and I had a crush on that 9-year-old down the street. And I knew that what he was talking about was about me, that I was down there with all those sinners and those murderers and those rapists, all 3 foot 4 inches of me at 6 years old. And making matters more difficult, all of a sudden my good Mormon father decides to take off and to leave our family, never to be heard from again, to go start a more fundamentalist life with other wives. And all of a sudden, my mom, who had polio as a kid, paralyzed from polio, braces and crutches, never driven a car, never had a job. All of a sudden, she has to figure out how to take care of these 3 kids. And you know who chipped in? You know who stood up and helped her? The U.S. Army stood up and said, we will give you the skills that you need to raise your boys, and I will be forever grateful for them doing that. But adding military to Mormon and Texan wasn't exactly easy for me. And so, that's the world I grew up in. That's the world I grew up in. But if you flash forward to 1996, a lot had changed for me. Like I said, we had moved to California. I had started to meet actual gay and lesbian people up in San Francisco in the theater world, and they didn't seem depressed, and I couldn't see those horns that the Mormon prophet had been talking about. They seemed to be having a pretty good time, even against some great challenges. And when I went down to UCLA to go to school, I met more gay and lesbian people. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever gone down to a little place called West Hollywood, there's a lot of gay people. And we were having an awfully good time. And I even started to, all right, we got one clap for Michael, for West Hollywood. And we were having an awfully good time. And I started to have my first crushes. And I actually had a crush on, again, an older guy. He was a 22-year-old grad student, but he wasn't really giving me the time of day. And I was a bit brokenhearted about it. And here I am thinking about that as I'm on this flight across the country, headed toward mom and thinking, you know, what am I going to talk about at dinner? What am I going to talk about at Christmas? I certainly can't talk about what I really would like to, which is how brokenhearted I am. And before I knew it, the plane had landed. And my stepdad was there to pick me up, and he picked me up and he drove me through the woods out to Manassas, Virginia, and there was my mom. She was just beaming and her hands held wide, and we gave each other a big, long hug, and I remember thinking, boy, I wonder if my mom would hug me like this if she knew the truth. And then right beside her was my big brother, and that was even more difficult. You know, he was such a tough guy, and he likes to watch cars go around in circles and shoot things for fun. Right? And he's got the big Megadeth poster and the Metallica poster, and he made endless fun of my New Kids on the Block posters. And I tried covering it up with the Paula Abdul poster, but that didn't work for him either. And it was just literally like we were oil and water, me and my big brother, and we kept growing apart, and I thought, boy, I wonder if my family will ever love me for me. And so what I did is I just raced through Christmas morning. I opened presents, went and had dinner, said, I am exhausted from traveling and all that turkey, so I'm going to go upstairs and go to bed. And I got upstairs, and I thought, boy, I did it. I didn't have to talk about a thing. And then I hear this sound coming. It's a very familiar sound for me. It's this click-clack sound, click-clack, 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 coming up the hallway. I'd heard it my whole life. It's my mom, and she's coming on her braces and her crutches, and she opens the door, and she sits down in the corner of my bed, and this was nothing new. This is what we always did. We would sit and talk for hours into the night about everything we cared about. I just had no clue what we would talk about, so she set the agenda. And she talked about what was in the headlines at the time, this thing called Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and she was so angered by it. But she wasn't angered by it because it excluded anyone. She was angered that it gave an opportunity for gay and lesbian people to serve in the military as long as they kept it secret. And she didn't know why anyone would let gay and lesbian people into her military. You know, aren't these people broken? Aren't they damaged? Don't they have these problems? And she went on and on and on. And I felt the tears starting to well up in my eyes, and I prayed for them to stay there. I prayed for those tears not to roll down my cheeks because I was not ready to come out. I did not want to come out, but they came down my cheeks. And my mom looked into my eyes, and she saw those tears, and she knew, as moms will. And I looked up into her eyes in return, and I could see a look of terror. I could see a look of extreme disappointment. How could she have broken her son, her precious son? How could she have damaged him like this? And is there any way to fix this? And we didn't resolve it on this trip home. I ended up flying back to Los Angeles, and and I saw my friends, and I didn't really feel like telling them about what had gone down, and they could tell something was wrong. And I said, well, graduation's coming in just a few months, and my mom's coming out. And they said, oh, no problem. We'll just make some food, some salad, and some pastas for her, and we'll have her over. And I was like, oh, okay. And that day came much sooner than I was ready for. And I hear that same sound, right? That click-clack, click-clack, click-clack. Mom is coming. And down the hallway of the apartment, and she comes in, and there's all my friends are there, and they have cooked a meal. There's some salads and some pastas, and she comes in the door and sees them. And I have to admit something to you. I absolutely copped out. I did not tell any of my friends that my mom was homophobic in the least, that she had a problem with her son. I just didn't want to. And I didn't tell my mom that so many of my friends were now gay and lesbian. So she walks in, and they all start to serve her salad, and they all start to serve her pasta. And I start to back into the kitchen because I'm realizing that because I've said nothing, they all assume that my mom loves gay people. Right? That she has no problem with her son. I mean, this is pre-Ellen, pre-Will and Grace. Right? So she's a goddamn saint. So all of a sudden, they start coming over and talking to her. and telling her their stories, telling them their stories of coming out, the rejection from their family, not being able to go home at all for the holidays. And they start feeling so comfortable, they start talking about their dating life and their sex life with my mother. And I'm horrified, and one by one they're leaving, and pretty soon, before I know it, it's just me and my mom. And she pats the chair next to her, I remember it so clearly, and I go and sit down next to her, and she says, well, I liked your friends. So good, I like my friends too. And she said, I spent some time in particular talking with a 22-year-old grad student. I said, oh, yes, him. She's like, well, he's nice, I like him. I said, okay, same here. And she said, well, I told him that he needs to stop taking you for granted. The next time he takes you to dinner, he ought to pay. And I felt this light inside of me. I felt myself light up in a way I had never lit up before as she wrapped her arms around me and held me. And for the very first time in my life, I knew my mom loved me for me. And I felt so empowered. And it had happened in one night because she met actual gay and lesbian people. She heard their stories. And in one night, that dispelled all of the lies and the myths and the stereotypes she had learned for generations in the military, in the South, and in the Mormon church. They were gone. And I thought, my God, if that's the power of our stories, if that's the power of the stories of those of us who are different, then that's what I'm going to make my life about, telling those stories. And so that's what I've done. I graduated from college, and I said, hey, you know, if I'm going to do a reality series, I'm going to do the gay episode, much to the chagrin of my producers. If I'm going to do a TV movie, I'm going to do the Pedro Zamora story. And within 10 years, I was getting to do the story of my great hero, whose quote I read at the beginning, named Harvey Milk. And why? Why did I take that story? Because I was looking, as I got to know my own movement, I was looking at my movement, the gay and lesbian movement, and going, my goodness, we have certainly become satisfied with crumbs. We have started to allow other people to speak for us, straight allies instead of ourselves. We have become myopic, only concerned with gay and lesbian issues and forgetting about our brothers and sisters in other communities. And here was a man who had a philosophy of being proud, of coming out, of telling your own stories, of reaching out, reaching across the aisle to unexpected allies, and to create those collaborations, what he called the coalition of the us's, so that we'd be unbeatable at the ballot box. You know, one of my favorite Harvey stories, and the thing that still drives me, and what made me want to make the movie, was his story that his struggle, starting this gay movement, did not start with fighting for gay issues. It started when a man named Alan Baird walked into his camera shop. And this was a Teamster. This was a Teamster driving trucks and fighting Coors beer, trying to get living wages for those drivers. And they couldn't, the Coors beer boycott just wasn't working. And Harvey said, oh, guess what? Well, us gays, we drink a lot of beer. And I'm going to go around and I'm going to get beer out of every single one of these bars in the Castro. And he did. And then out of every bar in San Francisco, and then out of every bar in California. And for the very first time in over a decade, Coors fell from number one and they caved. And the truckers were working again. That's right. And when Harvey Milk, when Alan Baird came back and said, what can we do for you? What can we do to thank you? They said, do you need an endorsement? Do you need us to pay for your campaign? And he said, no, you just need to know that we exist, that we are your neighbors, we are your friends, and we are your coworkers. And what did Alan do? He went and hired the very first openly gay Teamsters in the state of California. So that's what a little coalition building can do. That's a little bit of the yeses can do. And I said, I got to make that movie. And I was so damn proud of myself up there making that movie in San Francisco and working so hard to make sure that we did it right that I was absolutely ignoring everyone, all my phone calls, and in particular the phone calls from my big brother. Now, you know, I told you a little bit about him, but my big brother was the first person in my family to drink and to smoke, which in the Mormon church is a big no-no. So, you know, it always was like he was in trouble. Times were often desperate, and so I was really hesitant to call, which was my bad, but I finally did. And I called him up, and I could hear that sound of desperation in his voice. And I said, "Hey, bro, what's up? You know, what happened? Did you get someone pregnant?" And he said, No. Do you know, dude, do you know my friend Larry? I said, yeah, I know Larry. You guys love to sit down in the basement and drink beer and watch cars go in a circle and kill things for fun. And he said, yeah, that's Larry. I said, well, what's up? And he said, Larry broke up with me. I said, what? He said, Larry broke up with me, and, we were down in the basement about a year ago, and we were watching a race and having a beer, and he leaned over and he kissed me. And nothing in my entire life has ever felt so right. Nothing in our entire lives has ever felt so true, and I love Larry, and he loves me, but he says we've got to stop because of what's going to happen if people find out. And I'm devastated. And I said, well, you've called the right guy. And I pulled out every hope speech I had. I pulled out every It Gets Better speech I had, and I gave it to him, and I read it, and I recited everything I had. But there was zero I could do, nothing I could do to put the sound of hope and liberation in his voice that I had felt when I came out. And I felt like such a fool. I felt like such a fool. Of course, I felt liberated. I came out in California, where at least we have laws protecting us so we don't lose our jobs and we don't lose our home if we come out. So people are coming out. That means they get to tell their stories. That means they get to introduce their families at work dinners and work parties. That means they get to dispel the myths and the lies and the stereotypes that have been plaguing my people for generations. My brother grew up in Texas, lived in Virginia, and was living right here in Holland, Michigan. So of course he was afraid, because he had everything to lose. Because people can't come out in their jobs. People can't come out without the fear of losing their home. They're not. And they're not bringing their partners to parties in many areas, certainly in the communities that my big brother holds dear. So they're not dispelling the myths and the lies and stereotypes. And my brother did have a lot to be afraid of, and so did Larry. And so I thought, well, I've got to up my game. You know, I can keep telling these stories, but I want to do more. And so I had the great honor of getting up on a stage, a very big stage, a few months later at the Oscars. And I got up there and I made a promise to the young people of this nation. And I said that they would have equal rights federally under the law. And when I got off that stage, thankfully I met a guy named Chad Griffin, who had a strategy and he had a plan. He said, hey, I've heard a rumor that, and don't gasp, you already know this anyway, that Ted Olson is pro-LGBT equality when it comes to marriage. I know, it was tough for me to believe at first too. I said, okay, so Ted Olson, but then what? And he said, well, Ted Olson's interested in doing this case with David Boies. Are you interested in doing it? And I thought, my God, well, this checks a lot of boxes for me, right? Talk about coalition building, talking about breaking down the red-blue divide, talking about reaching across the aisle and creating a new narrative to take this out of a red-blue, a progressive, or a conservative fight and start making the conservative case for marriage equality. Okay, I think I'm in, but I started getting a lot of heat, maybe from some people in this room. I started getting a lot of heat, especially from the gay and lesbian community, saying, hey, you need to slow down, you need to quiet down, you might create a backlash, it might be too soon. And I thankfully got to have lunch with someone who was a great hero of mine. If you ever get the opportunity to win an Oscar, you get to kind of say, oh, I want to meet that person and that person. And I really, really wanted to meet a man named Julian Bond. And I sat down to lunch with Julian Bond. You can applaud for him. I love it. And he said to me, Lance, good things do not come to those who wait, they come to those who agitate. And I said, well, Julian, I can one-up you. I have a Harvey Milk quote, and it goes like this. Masturbation can be fun, but it does not take the place of the real thing. It is about time that the gay community stop playing with itself and get down to the real thing. There are people who are satisfied with crumbs because that's all they think they can get, when in reality, if they demand the real thing, they will find that they indeed can get it. So guess what? We filed that court case. and we sued the state of California in federal court saying that Proposition 8 is unconstitutional, and if you've been paying any attention, and I hope you have, you know that we've been winning. And it taught me something as I sat there in that courtroom day after day. It taught me something about the power of storytelling, the power of what it is all of you do and what you do, and how it supports the truth of storytelling. You know, I struggle to tell stories all the time and make them as truthful as I can. We can see that when you put something on the ballot, there's very little truth anywhere. Just turn on your TV. What I learned in that courtroom is that both sides have to come in, they have to raise their right hands and testify under oath. And what happens in that courtroom is the most important storytelling we have in this nation. So I say, ACLU, you keep fighting hard in the courts. Don't back down that you go to court too often or you go to court too vigorously. Keep doing it. It's the most important place in the world to make the truth known and to tell our stories. So I've been so emboldened again, and I've been so excited to watch us win at the district court. And then, earlier this year, if you were paying attention, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the decision. And I lit up. I was so excited. All I wanted to do was to run to the phone and call my big brother and say, "Big brother, we are now one step away. That this case or a case like it is going to be in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, and my win will be your win, and my freedom will be your freedom. And when I feel liberation in my heart, so will you." But I couldn't. Because about a month earlier, I was out here with my brother, holding his hand as he lost his battle with cancer. And he died. And my brother will never in his life feel that feeling of freedom. He will never in his life feel that feeling of liberation, of hope that I have. And that is a tragedy. But it is a tragedy of incrementalism. It is a tragedy of demanding crumbs, because if you demand crumbs, all you're going to get is littler crumbs. It is a tragedy of geography. It's a tragedy of a checkerboard nation where some areas are free and some areas are not free. He died without hope in his heart because he was living in Michigan instead of California, and that has to end. So what do I want? I'll tell you what I want. I want Texas to be free, and I want Michigan to be equal, and I want the nation to know it and to follow that great lead. Because that's how it's going to happen. Let me tell you what happens when you win here in Michigan. And I know you have hard work to do to win here in Michigan. When you win here in Michigan, any little win, that next morning, that young person out here in Michigan is going to read in the paper that it's okay to be a little bit different. In fact, you should be respected and protected for it. They're going to see it in their parents' paper. They're going to hear it on TV. And you're going to give them hope, and you're going to save lives. But not just that. It's not just the young people paying attention. I'll tell you. There's 9 other folks paying close attention to Michigan. It's called the U.S. Supreme Court Justices. They're looking at what's happening in this nation. They're looking at the change you're going to continue to create here. And they don't want to be 10 steps behind. They want to be about 2 steps ahead, right? And they never, ever want to be behind the arc of history again when it comes to equality. So they're paying close attention. And how do we do it? How do we create change here in Michigan? Well, one thing you got to do is what you're already doing here tonight, and you have to give. And if you can, give a little more to the ACLU, who does this work every single day to make sure that all of our truths are known. Next, I want you to educate yourself and your neighbors and your friends on the candidates and vote. Make sure you are voting for candidates and judges who listen to the truth and listen to the facts and listen to the evidence before making their decisions. And then I want you to go out there and I want you to find as many unexpected allies as you can. That means reaching across the aisle, going to uncomfortable places for some of you perhaps, making this no longer a red or a blue issue and figuring out not just the progressive arguments for change and equality and civil rights, but also the conservative cases for those same civil liberties. And how do you do it? How do you change those minds? Because some are tough to change. I hope I've given you a little taste of it tonight. I hope I've given you a bit of an example, and that is to tell your personal story. As Michael said last night, tell them your why. Your why is what changes minds. Never underestimate the power of your personal story to change minds and bring people over to the side of equality. Because once they come to the side of equality, they never leave. So I want to leave you by saying it's so important tonight to rededicate ourselves with this outreach, this education, this fundraising that we have to do, and this storytelling we have to do, and get out there and tell your stories, please, so we can start to win at the local level here, at the state level here, to make this a more equal nation. A more equal nation for everybody, not an equal nation of sameness, but an equal nation of difference, an equal nation for the us's, so that we are no longer ever leaving behind a single one of our brothers and our sisters, no matter the color of their skin, their gender, the amount of money in their bank account, the God that they pray to, or the love in their heart. Never, never again. And it can start right here. It can start right here in Michigan. Thank you so very much.